some of the changes in emotion and life satisfaction and so forth. That actually, typically, some of the highest levels of sadness and emotional distress are actually in the age decade of the 20s. Along with actually the highest levels of perceived loneliness are among people in their 20s, and it kind of, on average anyway, drops as you get into your 30s, and then sort of stays there probably at least in the 70s, 75 or so. And as we get more and more data on the old, just in the last few years, going up to 70, 75, it started to look like maybe there was a little bit of an uptick in the 70s and average levels of sadness. It didn't seem to be anywhere close to where you get in your 20s. And now it's starting to look like maybe as you get into your 80s and 90s, you might get back to or almost back to where people on average are in their 20s. Because you consider all the stuff that's going on in your 80s and 90s. Shouldn't be too surprising. And I just put this in to show the arousal kinds of issues. Bob Levinson and colleagues up at Berkeley and Stanford looked at emotion off and on, both in individuals and also in couples at different ages, which is really interesting because along with John Gottman at the University of Washington, you can bring couples in and have them fight. And they're like wired up to all this psychophys stuff, and you can monitor their physiological reactions to the argument, and then people can do their self-report ratings by twisting dials that they're holding in their hands. One of the things they found early on doing that might be useful for all you keep in mind when you're fighting is that it seems like men tend to find the physiological arousal associated with fighting unpleasant, and it drives them to try to retreat from the argument. And women don't seem to mind it so much. They get this pattern like the guy's trying to walk away and the woman's following. But more to our point here, it's kind of this general pattern across like anger, fear, sadness, disgust, that you've got much higher amplitude heart rate responses in the young adult sample than you do in an older adult sample, and then the finger temperature changes, the same kinds of things with regard to anger, fear, a little bit off.
In regards to their heart rate, is that simply because of some sort of psychological factor? Is it because they can no longer achieve the same heart rate anymore? As you age,
these are actually change scores. So, although you could get into some fairly subtle mathematical arguments about this, in principle they should be sort of adjusted for the resting changes and the difficulties. Okay. I mean, there is some argument about whether physiologically older adults can react as much. Yeah. And how much that's part of this whole experience. I mean, it's pretty clear. It's quite consistent that older adults show lower physiological arousal under emotional conditions.
Do they self-report as?
It depends on how you ask
or do
the
they
question.
Just don't? I know that from 20 years ago to now, I just don't care the same amount. If someone's going to be a jerk, then I just don't. It's so much easier to walk away from.
It gets a little tricky in terms of how well standardized the self-report measures are, because people who do this kind of research on the psychophys mostly just have people doing like Likert type ratings of the emotion, because you need like moment-to-moment ratings. You can't do full questionnaires. What you typically see if you're asking for ratings of the specific emotions, older adults on a Likert type scale report about the same numbers as young people do. You don't get significant age differences in that self-reported subjective experience of these same emotions, and that's what they report in this study. With arousal itself, it depends a bit on how you ask the question. So, like if your question focuses on the emotional experience, like anger and fear, you tend to get kind of equivalent responses. If you ask people about more, if your questions focus more on the sensation of physiological arousal, older adults report lower arousal levels. So it's like the it's almost as it seems like the physiological state and the subjective experience of emotion is not as tied together for older adults as it is for younger people. Or maybe it's not that tied together.
So I know Patrick asked this, but I still want to understand. So these are actually measured, the changes in BPM. So the question is that because they're not capable of higher levels of change, or just because they're the disinterest thing? Or, I mean, I have been listening, but maybe you did say it, but.
We mostly interpret it as having to do with lower arousal levels, or physiological arousal levels.
You mean higher arousal, that it takes more to get them?
No, the older adults experience less arousal to the same kind of stimuli.
And is that physiological or psychological? Or we don't?
I think we really don't know. I mean, in some sense, I think we really don't know. Yeah, Jeff?
What are your thoughts on the fact that, like, it's interesting to note that there's a significant difference in heart rate. But when you look like at something like finger temperature for fear, it's almost the same. Is that just physiologically? Because I would think that would have to do, I mean, the temperature has a lot to do with circulation, right? And for older adults, you wouldn't expect you would expect us to see a big change there, I would think, from young to old.
Well, again, these are change scores. This isn't.
But the change is still
resting
significant. Like compared to, you look at the change for young in heart rate to old, and even finger temperature, it's like half. But it's almost the same. The change is almost as much as it is for the young.
Or for fear.
For fear finger temperature.
Yeah. That one is not a particularly good example. I mean, this is a good example. You know, what I was telling you about in terms of like looking at what people say versus looking at the figures and thinking about them yourself. This is a good example of that. You know, everything else in the graph supports their general statement, and I think that's kind of their basing their general findings on. But you got the finger temperature, fear thing is not so much. And the other thing. Trying to think how to say this, that you want to be, we have this sort of metaphysical conviction in our society that more physically based, physically measurable things are somehow more real than the internal psychological states. And I think out of that, we tend to put a lot of weight on physical measures of emotion, and there's a whole trend in psychology that's been there forever, and in people's way of relating to emotion research and emotion theory, that you really want to say like this is the underlying real stuff. And the connections between the psychophysiology and the emotion are all a little bit tenuous and a little bit uncertain. Now, one of the things that Levinson has made his career on is one of the points of this article is that you have essentially the same patterns of psychophysiological response across, they actually did, I think, up to 6 psychophysiological measures, so that the patterns were the same between young and old for each discrete emotion having a discrete pattern of psychophysiological response, but the amplitude was lower, was his general finding. And Levinson's career has somewhat been based on actually arguing for and finding these discrete patterns of psychophysiological response to discrete emotions, starting from a time point in the kind of late